Okay, so today you guys are going to get introduced to something called the unit circle. Before we get into that, I want to review some of the special triangle stuff that you did on that worksheet in 8.1, okay? So if you remember, we learned about 3 special triangles. The first one was a 30, 60, 90 triangle, where the side lengths are have the ratio x for the short side, 2x for the hypotenuse, and x times the square root of 3 for the long side. In addition to that, I could take that triangle, and you're going to see why I do this in a second, and I could flip it so that the 30-degree angle is on the bottom, and again, the ratio is the same. I still have x on the short side, 2x on the hypotenuse, and x times the square root of 3 on that long side. Now they're just kind of in different spots because I flipped the whole triangle. The second special triangle is the 45, 45, 90 triangle, where the side lengths, the two sides have the same length, and then the hypotenuse is x times the square root of 2. So those are the special triangles that you needed in order to complete assignment 8.1, and those are going to relate to the unit circle, which we're going to talk about today. So all the unit circle is it's going to eventually allow us to calculate the measure of different angles, so sine and cosine. It's going to be able to allow us to do sine and cosine of certain very common angles in our heads without using our calculator. It's going to give us the exact answer instead of a decimal. So we're going to introduce the unit circle today. So you should have a cream sheet in front of you. What I want you to do is grab that cream sheet, and you need to have this and not lose it. So put your name on it immediately, and then flip it over, because on the back side of your cream sheet, I want to include some drawings of triangles that are going to be super, super useful and show up all over your unit circle. Okay, the reason we call it a unit circle is because it's just a circle that has a radius of 1. So you're going to see lots and lots of triangles that have a hypotenuse of 1, and I'll show you a little bit what I mean in a second. Hopefully by now you're on the back of your sheet, and I want you to copy the first triangle. It's going to show up first on your unit circle, and it is a 30, 60, 90 triangle with the 30 degree here. So I kind of drew it right underneath where that original one is. And I told you that the unit circle has a radius of 1. So you're going to see on that unit circle that the radius is the hypotenuse, and so I put a 1 there on the hypotenuse. And we're going to calculate what the lengths of the other two sides are. Okay? So I see that if this is a 1, this short length has to be half the distance of that. So if this side, the hypotenuse, is 1, then that means that this short side has to be 1/2. So go ahead and add 1/2 as that short side. Okay? Now in order to get from the short side to the long side, I just take it and multiply it by the square root of 3. So all I'm doing is multiplying 1/2 here times the square root of 3, and so that just gives me square root 3 over 2. Go ahead and add that in as well. Okay? That's one of the triangles that's going to show up a lot on your unit circle. Now let's draw another one. The second one you're going to need, and this is the third one you're going to need, but we're going to do it now because it matches a lot of what we just did. Is the 60-degree triangle. So you're going to see that this hypotenuse again is 1, and the short side is going to have the same length of 1/2. The long side is going to have the same length of square root 3 over 2, and we get those the same way that we just did with that first red triangle. Okay? The only other thing you're going to need is the 45-degree triangle, and that 45-degree triangle, again, it has a hypotenuse of 1. In order to get from the hypotenuse to the short side, if I were going from the short side to the hypotenuse, I would multiply by the square root of 2. But since I'm going backwards and trying to get to that short side, I'm instead going to divide by the square root of 2 to get there. So this little side is going to be 1 over the square root of 2. Now, I don't like to have square roots in the denominator. So in order to get rid of that square root that's in the denominator, I need to multiply to get rid of it. So I'm going to multiply by square root 2 over 2. And what happens then is the top is just 1 times the square root of 2, which is the square root of 2. And the bottom is square root 2 times square root 2, which is the square root of 4, or just 2. See how that kind of gets rid of that square root in the denominator? So instead of writing that side length as 1 over the square root of 2, I'm going to write it as square root 2 over 2. It means the same thing, but that's how I'm going to write it. Okay? So we're going to use these 3 triangles when we're filling in the unit circle. Go ahead and flip that unit circle back over. And we're going to start filling it in, okay? Now, you're going to see a lot of blanks on your unit circle. We're going to fill in the degrees today, and then we're also going to fill in the coordinates of each of those points on the unit circle. There's going to be one more blank that's open, and we'll fill that in sometime next week after we've sort of gotten the hang of what we already are going to fill in today. Okay, so go ahead and flip it over. Let's do the front side. So the first thing we're going to do is this first angle. If you look at the very first angle of your circle, this is where we're going to start counting from. This point right here. So this is either 0 degrees or 360 degrees, depending on if you're starting the circle, if you've got all the way around and you're back to 360. Okay, you know a circle has 360 degrees in it, so that whole circle would be that. Okay, and again, we could go around the circle multiple times, and we'll talk more about that later. What I want you to do is think about this as we are labeling this x and y coordinate, and this is the unit circle. So we're going to be counting from this center point, which is 0, 0, and we're going to try and label the coordinates of each of the dots around the outside of the circle. Okay, so right now, if I wanted to label the x and y coordinates of this point, they would just be 1, 0. The unit circle, remember, has a radius of 1, so if I'm going to come all the way over here on the x-axis, that's a distance of 1, and a y distance of 0 from 0, 0. Okay, hopefully that's obvious to you because of this distance radius being 1. Okay, it gets a little trickier as we build around our unit circle, but with the triangles you just had in the back, we should be able to figure it out. Okay, now the next major angle we're going to use is that 30-degree angle. So go ahead and fill in 30 degrees on your unit circle. And I do not draw these triangles in with me. That's why I made them dotted lines, because it's going to make your unit circle look really, really, really messy. So don't draw these triangles in. Hopefully you can just kind of follow along with me to figure out how I'm getting everything that I am. Okay? So we're trying to figure out what the coordinates of this point are on the unit circle. Okay? So in order to do that, I need to figure out how far in the x direction it is and how far in the y direction it is. And this is a 30-degree triangle. So we're going to use that first special triangle that we did on the back. And if you flip it over and look, you're going to see that the x distance here, if I have a hypotenuse of 1 on this triangle, the x distance we found was square root 3 over 2, and the y distance was 1/2. So I'm going to add that in on my triangle. Again, don't draw the triangle on yours. But now, if I want to label the coordinates of this point, well, the x coordinate is just square root 3 over 2. That's how far over I have to go. And the y coordinate's just 1/2. So now you can, on your unit circle, fill those coordinates in. Square root 3 over 2 and 1/2. Okay? Now, we're going to use our second special triangle that you drew on the back. Okay? The next one goes with 45 degrees. Again, don't draw this triangle, but try and follow along with what I'm doing. Okay, this is our 45-degree angle, and we are trying to find the coordinates of this dot on our unit circle. Okay, so we're trying to figure out what are the coordinates of this space. Let me see if it'll let me write right in there. Okay, so we're trying to figure out what are the coordinates of this dot, and if you look at what I've done on my triangle with the dotted lines, the x distance is square root 2 over 2, and so is the y distance, also square root 2 over 2. Okay? So the x and y coordinates at 45 degrees are square root 2 over 2 and square root 2 over 2 because of that second special triangle. Okay, one more. The 60-degree angle is next, and I can draw in that third green special triangle, and it's the same as the red one, except it's flipped over on its side, so that x distance is 1/2, and the y distance is square root 3 over 2. Okay, that's the special triangles we found on the back side of your sheet. So the coordinates of that dot, right where my arrow is pointing on the unit circle, is the x coordinate is over 1/2, the y coordinate is up square root 3 over 2, and you can write those in as well. Okay, last but not least, I'm going to do this 90-degree angle, which should be fairly easy. Remember, the radius of this circle is 1, so the coordinates of this dot right here would be, the x coordinate would be 0, I don't move left and right at all, and the y coordinate would be 1. I don't go left and right, I just go up 1. Okay? Right now you don't see the reason for needing to know this, but as we kind of work through the rest of this last chapter of the year, you'll start to see how this all fits together and is relevant. Okay? All right, now that was kind of tricky, but the rest of the circle just follows that same pattern of triangles, so it'll get a little bit easier now. But go ahead, we're going to look in the second quadrant. And here's what you already know. Okay, you already have this 90 degrees written in. The next thing is 30 degrees past 90, which is 120. And you should see that it matches up with this angle right across that y-axis. Okay, so my dimensions of this 60-degree triangle are still the same. It's still 1/2 across and square root 3 over 2 up. See how that short side would be 1/2 and square root 3 over 2 is longer. Okay? The only difference now is that from 0, 0, as I move in the x direction, I'm moving in a negative direction. So the only difference between this and the angle across from it is that now my x-coordinate is negative. Okay? So now here I've got a negative 1/2 and a positive square root 3 over 2. I move in that negative x direction and the positive y direction. Okay? The next angle on your unit circle is going to be 135 degrees. That is 45 degrees past 90, and it should be right mirroring the 45-degree angle on the other side. It's going to work the same. The side lengths of your triangle are the same as the 45-degree angle. The only difference is that we have to move in the negative x direction this time. Okay, so negative square root 2 for the x-coordinate and positive square root 2 over 2 for the y-coordinate. Okay? Last angle in the second quadrant that is a little bit funky is the 150 degrees. That is 60 degrees past 90, or rather 30 up from the x-axis. So it's the same as the 30-degree angle over here, the only difference being that the coordinates here, again, we go in the negative x direction, the positive y direction. So you're going to notice that for everything in the second quadrant, the x is negative and the y is positive, which should make some sense, okay? Halfway around a circle, you all know, is 180 degrees, and the coordinates of that 180 degrees would be negative 1, comma 0. Okay, negative 1 in the x direction, 0 up and down. Okay? Let's go ahead and move on to the third quadrant. Okay, we label we go 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees, and 90 degrees from 180. So I can label all those degrees. Okay, 210 is 30 past, 225 is 45 past, 240 is 60 past, and then 270 is 90 degrees past. Why don't you take a second, pause the video, and see if you can figure out what the x and y coordinates of each of those angles would be. Okay, you should have found some patterns between this 210, the 150, and the 30, which are all 30-degree angles off that x-axis. The only difference here is that I'm moving in the negative x direction and the negative y direction. So the coordinates of this point are going to be negative square root 3 over 2 and negative 1/2. The same is going to be true of all of these. They're all going to be the same as the x and y coordinates above. The only difference is that we're moving in the negative x and the negative y here. So I get negative square root 3 over 2 and negative 1/2 for this 210. I get negative square root 2 over 2 and negative square root 2 over 2 for the 225. And I get negative 1/2 and negative square root 3 over 2 for the 240. Okay? At 270, I just come straight down, so I go 0 left and right, and I just come down 1. Okay? Last but not least, let's label these last few angles here that you have in the fourth quadrant. Pause the video. Hopefully you figured out the patterns by now, and you can play again when you're ready to hear and check your answers. Okay, so for these three angles, they should mirror the angles above plus the angles to the left in the third quadrant. This is the 30-degree angle, the 45-degree angle, and the 60-degree angle, so those should match up with the 30, the 45, and the 60 up above. And this time, my x is positive. In the x direction, I'm moving towards the right, which is positive, and in the y direction, I'm moving down, which is negative. So all of those numbers are the same as they have been at other points in your circle. They're just positive x's and negative y's. Okay? At this point, you are going to need to memorize, and there's plenty of tricks, and for me, visualizing the triangles really helps, but you're going to have to memorize all the x and y coordinates of the degrees around your unit circle. We're going to work on that next week, Monday and Tuesday, memorizing and using these. And then you're going to have a little quiz next Wednesday just to see, do you know all of the X and Y coordinates for each angle measure. So take a second and check to make sure that your unit circle matches mine. All the positives are there, all the negatives are there, and all of the square root 3/2s and 1/2 are in the right order. Just take a second, pause, double check, and make sure that your unit circle matches mine. Okay? I don't want you to memorize the wrong thing. Okay? After that, you're just going to work on assignment 8.2, which is all review material. So this unit circle stuff won't be on there, just in case you need some help clarifying. But work on that 8.2 in teams, and any questions that you have, hopefully my notebook is out, but we will go over those questions on Monday. Okay? Do your best to do what you can as a team.